In the blink of an eye, 6 missiles tore through the sky, targeting a U.S. military base in Qatar, shaking the very ground beneath our global stability. As the world watches with bated breath, one question rises above the sound of explosions. Where is hope when the world is on fire? Tonight we look beyond the battlefield, not only at the missiles, but at the message hidden within the madness. And in an unexpected turn, we turn to the words of a woman known not for war, but for miracles. In the stillness before dawn, the world changed in an instant. Over 6 ballistic missiles launched from Iranian territory streaked across the sky, targeting a U.S. military base in Qatar. Within seconds, alarms lit up, soldiers scrambled, and the Middle East held its breath again. Once more, we find ourselves standing at the crossroads of conflict and consequence. This wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a message, a provocation with intent. And for everyone watching, whether from newsrooms, war rooms, or living rooms, it was a chilling reminder of just how fragile peace really is. Let's be clear. This was not just an isolated attack. This was a calculated escalation, a power play rooted in tension that has been simmering for years. It comes in the wake of complex diplomatic breakdowns, economic sanctions, assassinations of key military figures, and perhaps most dangerously, a rising sense of impunity. The Iranian regime, emboldened by alliances and driven by unresolved grievances, made a statement, not just to America, but to the world. That statement, sent via missile, challenges the balance of power in one of the most volatile regions on Earth. The U.S. military base hit in Qatar isn't just a compound of brick, steel, and runways. It's a strategic nerve center, a hub of intelligence, logistics, and coordination for joint operations across the region. Striking it isn't just about hitting a target, it's about hitting what that target represents: strength, presence, deterrence. In doing so, Iran didn't just disrupt operations or threaten American soldiers. They tested a red line, and now the world watches for America's next move, carefully calculating what this act demands in response. But the implications stretch far beyond military strategy. This assault has sent shockwaves into oil markets, rattled investor confidence, and put American allies on high alert. NATO is watching, Israel is watching, Russia and China watching with opportunistic eyes. What unfolds next will shape regional policy, fuel political campaigns, and perhaps rewrite entire diplomatic doctrines. For every missile fired, there are dozens of questions launched in its wake. How will the U.S. respond? Will this draw us into yet another sustained conflict? Or will diplomacy be summoned before the flames grow higher? What makes this moment even more sobering is how familiar it all feels. We've seen this before. Different countries, different decades, but the same haunting rhythm. Provocation, retaliation, escalation. Each time the stakes grow higher and the exits more narrow. And as we stand again on that precipice, we have to ask, have we learned anything? Are we any closer to breaking this cycle, or are we simply condemned to repeat it? In the chaos of headlines and heavy decisions, it's easy to lose sight of the human lives at the center of this story. The soldiers stationed at that base, many of them barely out of high school, were jolted from sleep by the shriek of incoming fire. Parents at home waited for phone calls that didn't come. Some still wait. And it's not just about Americans. The base includes service members and contractors from allied nations. And its proximity to Qatari civilian areas raises concerns for families just going about their lives. At its heart, this conflict, like every conflict, is not about countries. It's about people. But what do we do in moments like this, where fear takes center stage and uncertainty clouds every horizon? How do we respond not just as nations but as human beings when the threat of war overshadows the hope for peace? That's why, as unexpected as it may seem, I bring up the name Kathryn Kuhlman. Because in times of global chaos, we don't just need analysis, we need revelation. Hey! Kuhlman, known not for her politics, but for her passion, not for her military insight, but her spiritual influence, reminded people in every generation that God is not absent in disaster, that miracles are born not in comfort, but in crisis, that even when rockets roar, he still speaks peace. Our world doesn't just need might, it needs meaning. That doesn't mean we ignore acts of aggression or downplay their seriousness. It means we pursue every response with eyes wide open, not just to military options, but to moral responsibility. We must protect lives, uphold justice, and strengthen alliances, but we must also break the cycle. Because if missiles continue to speak louder than diplomacy, then no one wins. Not America, not Iran, not the silent world that watches at the edge of catastrophe. So here we are again on the edge, a region on fire, a fragile peace shattered, and ahead of us, 1,000 different paths, each one paved with risk. But before the next decisions are made, before the next headline scrolls across the screen, we pause, not in fear, not in retreat, but in reflection. This is not just about bombs. It's about who we become in the blast. And this time, we cannot afford to look away. In the aftermath of the missiles, once the smoke begins to lift and the sirens quiet down, what's left is not just rubble or wreckage. It's the raw human cost. Beneath every headline about military retaliation or geopolitical strategy, there are names that will never make the news. There are sons and daughters halfway across the world trying to sleep on cold bunks while distant explosions echo in their ears. There are mothers staring at their phones, praying the next call isn't one that changes their life forever. That's the part of war most people don't see. The part that lingers long after the missiles have hit their mark. This attack wasn't just about Iran flexing its power or challenging a global giant. It was about striking fear, not only into soldiers, but into the hearts of nations. And when fear spreads, it doesn't recognize political borders or military rank. It finds its way into homes, into airports, into ordinary spaces once untouched by the weight of war. Suddenly, conversations around the dinner table become filled with what-ifs. Students with dreams of the future begin to wonder about draft notices. Military families live hour to hour, praying their loved ones aren't in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. Every missile fired deepens distrust. Each act of aggression rips a little more of the fabric that holds diplomacy together. We are watching a chain reaction in motion, because when one nation moves with violence, others respond in kind. What begins as a targeted strike could so easily widen into something broader. something bloodier. History has shown us how quickly that descent can. But here's where we need to pause. Because amid all the analysis, the strategy, the government statements, there's another voice that must be heard. It's the quiet but powerful voice that says, enough. Enough of the cycle, enough of the devastation. Enough of normalizing war like it's just another part of the evening news. We've grown dangerously desensitized to the images, crumbling buildings, wounded soldiers, grieving parents. Somehow, they've started to look more like scenes from a film than reality. But they are real, and it's our responsibility to not just see them, but to feel them. This is where the life and message of Kathryn Kuhlman breaks through the noise, not from a place of military power, but from the deeper place of human compassion. She wasn't a general or a politician. She didn't hold a seat in any government, but her voice carried something sorely missing in moments like this. The call to believe in healing, in reconciliation, in miracles. Her ministry was a reminder that even in a broken world, healing is still possible, not just for bodies, but for nations. And do we ever need healing right now? Look at the people affected by this strike. Not just the soldiers injured or endangered, but the civilians nearby. The international military personnel, the local communities caught in the crossfire. War doesn't end with a ceasefire. The trauma stays behind. In children who can't sleep through the night, in veterans whose scars go far deeper than anything visible, in parents who never stop counting the cost. Peace, when it finally arrives, will have to work 10 times harder to repair what has been so carelessly broken. That's why talk of retaliation alone isn't enough. That's why chest pounding and threat trading isn't going to bring the security leaders claim we're fighting for. True strength, real strength, lies in restraint, in wisdom, in knowing when to stand firm and when to seek peace with courage. It's much harder to build bridges than to launch missiles. It takes more courage to forgive than to fight. Kathryn Kuhlman understood that. She spoke often about the power of love, not as a soft or sentimental virtue, but as the only force strong enough to break through hate, to defy cycles of violence, to transform hearts hardened by war. Make no mistake, we must defend lives. We must stand against acts of terror and hold nations accountable. But we must do so with a vision that extends beyond immediate revenge, because revenge feeds conflict. Vision plants peace. And if we can't start moving toward a future where diplomacy matters more than destruction, we're bound to repeat this dance of death again and again. Right now, someone is weeping for a child in uniform they can't protect. A soldier is mentally preparing for a retaliation they didn't ask for. A diplomat somewhere is wondering if they'll ever be heard over the roar of rockets. And perhaps, most heartbreakingly, there are children growing up in places like Gaza, Tehran, Jerusalem, and even Washington, D.C., believing that this fear, this division, this endless war is just part of life. It doesn't have to be. That's why we remember not just the cost of war, but the calling to peace. A calling every generation must hear anew. Peace isn't passive. It isn't weakness. It's the most courageous pursuit there is. And in moments like this, when fear tries to convince us that violence is the only language power understands, we must be bold enough to speak a different language. We don't just honor the fallen through moments of silence. We honor them by building a world where war is no longer the loudest sound we hear. It's in the moments we feel most uncertain that something inside all of us begins to search for answers, for direction, for something solid when the ground beneath us is shaking. In times of war, in the face of violence and unpredictability, that search becomes urgent. We look to our leaders. We look to experts. Some look to the sky and ask questions they've never had the courage to voice before. Because when missiles fall and the streets are filled with the sound of sirens, hope doesn't just become helpful, it becomes essential. And that's where this conversation must turn now, from missiles to meaning, from strategy to spirit. Because just as fear spreads like fire, so can faith. And in this hour, where fear is thick in the air, we must remember that faith still has the power to speak louder. It's easy to believe in something greater when the world is calm, when your plans are moving forward, when life feels manageable. But what happens when everything is thrown into chaos in a matter of minutes? What happens when control slips through your fingers and the future feels cloaked in shadow? That's precisely the moment when faith becomes more than a belief. It becomes a lifeline. Right now, there are thousands of people, soldiers in bunkers, civilians in war zones, anxious families watching their screens, asking one simple aching question: where is God in all of this? And it's not a question of theology. It's a question of survival. It's a cry not of doubt, but of desperation. And it's not new. It's the same cry that's echoed across centuries of conflict, from the trenches of Europe to the deserts of the Middle East. We cry out not because we have no faith, but because we long for faith to make itself known. Kathryn Kuhlman knew something about that cry. She felt it in the faces of the broken people she prayed for, people who had lost everything and came to her meetings with nothing more than a fragile sliver of hope that something unseen might still be real. And over time, she became proof for many that even in a world ravaged by pain, the presence of God could be more than a theological idea. It could be experienced, felt, trusted, and we must choose to trust again, especially now. Not with blind idealism or shallow sentiment, but with a deep conviction that divine presence is not absent from disaster. That even as global powers clash and the threat of war hangs heavy over us, God has not gone silent. He is near to the frightened, near to the grieving, near to the leaders who don't know what to do next. He is present in the act of one soldier helping another to safety, present in the trembling prayers whispered in hospital rooms, present in the voices rising around the world, calling not for vengeance, but for wisdom, for restraint, for peace. There is something powerful that rises in the soul when you believe you are not alone. And that belief, that unshakable hope from beyond ourselves, is what will carry us through moments darker than diplomacy can solve. If we're being honest, no resolution drafted at a table will fully calm the fears we carry in our hearts. No military victory, no matter how swift or strategic, will restore what war has stolen from a family's kitchen table. That kind of restoration comes only from something deeper. And that's why we speak of miracles. not because we're avoiding reality, but because we're holding out for something greater than it. Miracles don't erase suffering, but they remind us it won't have the final say. Peace doesn't grow in the absence of chaos. It grows right in the middle of it, watered by the tears of people who refuse to stop believing in God, in the good, in each other. Faith teaches us that the fire doesn't destroy everyone it touches. Sometimes it refines. Sometimes it reveals what we were made of. And if this season, this attack, this threat of greater war, if all of it has taught us anything, it's that we need more than military strength. We need moral strength. We need spiritual clarity. We need voices that can pray just as fiercely as others plot retaliation. And through all of that, in the heat of firepower and the hush of prayer, perhaps the most powerful truth we can hold is this: God is not afraid of our fear. He does not recoil from our chaos. He steps into it. That's who he is. That's how he heals. Not by sparing us from the fire, but by walking with us through it. So if tonight your heart is heavy, your prayers feel small, or your hope feels like it's holding on by a thread, remember this: even now, especially now, faith still works, hope still breathes, and heaven still hears.